Welcome to this edition of Tour Confidential on Golf.com. I'm Jessica Marksbury, joined in our New York City studio by Golf Magazine senior editor Jeff Ritter and Sports Illustrated senior writer Gary Van Sickle via Skype. The British Open is now only 1 week away, and the world's top players had a choice of 2 warm-up events. One right here in the States in the Midwest, the John Deere Classic. The other, the Scottish Open at Royal Aberdeen. And Gary, let's start with this question. Of course, between these 2 events, the stronger field is at the Scottish Open at Royal Aberdeen. But is it really necessary to prepare for the British Open by heading overseas a week early? Is links golf really that much more complicated?
Well, it's not that different from playing a firm, fast, burnt-out American golf course. We don't have very many of those unless you want to count Pinehurst or the U.S. Open. If nothing else, I would go over, all things being equal, I would at least go over a week early to adjust the time period if I was that serious about winning the Open Championship.
You know, when I think about playing links golf overseas, you've got to think about the weather. It can wear you down sometimes. It's cold, it's rainy. Some guys just don't want to endure 2 weeks of that, right?
How many bump and run 5-irons are you going to hit at the John Deere? You know, it's just, there are a lot of different shots that you play in links golf. And I guess if you're going to compare the John Deere to the Scottish Open, I looked at the list of John Deere winners going all the way back, and I didn't see anybody win a John Deere and then win the British Open the next week. But I only had to go back to last year to find a Scottish Open winner who won the British Open, Phil Mickelson. So it's a different game. There's a lot of different shots that you play. You're never going to lose a ball in the trees at the British Open like you would at the John Deere. So for me, I don't think there's any question. If you're trying to get ready for the British Open in the best way possible, go play the Scottish Open.
Let me play devil's advocate a little bit, because these are professional golfers that we're talking about, guys. A bump and run isn't so complicated, right? I mean, come on.
I'd like to practice it a little bit. I don't know. I mean, it's not something you could just pull out of your bag, you know, without warming that up a little bit. And to test it in competition, I think it helps to play the Scottish Open. But you're right. These guys are pros, and I mean, they do this for a living. They have those shots, but I don't think the extra practice is such a bad thing.
Well, Gary, one player that we won't be seeing at either of these warm-up events is Tiger Woods. And over the weekend, Tiger made some headlines because his former coach, Hank Haney, said this is evidence, the fact that Tiger is not playing any warm-up events going into the British Open, that he just doesn't care as much anymore. What do you think of those comments?
Well, I think there's, you know, I wrote about something similar before the Masters where Tiger's, you know, drive or motivation may not be what it once was, and, you know, how could it be, really? But I'm not sure if that's related to him not caring enough or the fact that, I mean, Hank, did you see Tiger picking the ball out of the cup when he played? I mean, he looked pretty, he looked like he was being pretty careful with his back. I don't think physically he was ready to play when he came back, and I'm not sure he's physically going to be ready to play at Royal Liverpool either. So I'm not sure it's a not care issue. I think it's, you know, my back is not ready for primetime issue. And I'll be honest, when he first announced he had this, I thought, well, he's not going to be back this year. He won't be back before the PGA, which means he'll miss the FedEx Cup. So I thought he was done for the year, but, you know, he's the most fit guy in golf, so maybe he can come back. But he sure didn't look ready when he did come back.
Tiger is one of the few players that seems to talk about every tournament in the sense of how it will prepare him for the next major championship. He doesn't seem to just, he picks his schedule very carefully, and I'm not really that surprised that he's not playing these lead-up events. They've never been that important to him.
No, I mean, and he said as much at Congressional that the main motivating force for him playing that week was because it was his event, and it was for his charity, and he was so involved as the tournament host that he really wanted to be there that week and to tee it up in the field, as opposed to just show up in sort of the ceremonial role. So I think if pressed, Tiger would admit he was back too early, you know, at Congressional. But the British Open is the one he's always sort of targeted in this comeback. I don't know if, I agree with Gary, I don't know if this is still too early, but as far as motivation, it's the majors that motivate Tiger now. Everything else is essentially a tune-up or a way to sort of prepare for him to peak those 4 weeks every year. And he's going to go into the British Open in the best shape he can be in. And for him, and I think given what we saw at Congressional, his best chance is to just shut it down these 2 weeks, practice on his own, and then return to competition at Hoylake.
Well, we'll certainly look forward to Tiger's return in 1 week at the Open Championship. Until then, we have the Scottish Open and the John Deere Classic. And remember, the John Deere is where Jordan Spieth made a huge splash with his first Tour win last year. So bound to be some excitement there. Gary, Jeff, thank you so much for your time and insight. And thank you all for joining us here on Tour Confidential on Golf.com. We'll see you next week.